was quite fascinating. I think one thing is clear that Lisa's risk appetite is much bigger than mine. Uh, I think my favorite part of going for a hike is the walk back to the car. So that's not quite. I mean, I guess the biggest risk I took today was trying to time a train here in London, which apparently has been quite a bit of a mess. But it was quite fascinating to hear a lot of the things that Lisa talked about in terms of ransomware attackers and threat actors and how they are really conducting business like it's a proper corporation. You know, they get raises. And I think to answer one of the questions that was asked earlier is like, at the end of the day, the attackers are just shifting what we have seen for centuries in the physical world, where people were robbing people physically, has just moved up into the digital world. And so as long as we're going to have somehow digital infrastructure correlated with money, there is always going to be a motivation and an incentive for people to go after businesses. And so just like what has happened in the physical world in terms of people, you know, having rings that go and rob jewelry stores and stuff like that, and whatever the government is doing, I think they're going to continue to, we're going to have to see how we will have government in partnership with the private entities trying to make a difference. I think the biggest difference, however, is that in a traditional scenario of protecting the country from nation-state attackers, you pay tax to the government, and the government goes and buys a bunch of planes and guns and ships, and they protect the border for you. And so you as a private company don't have to have a missile detection system in your parking lot to protect yourself from a nation-state attacker. However, in the cyber world, you do. You are a company that is hosting information about the entire country, citizens, whether it's a critical infrastructure, your private company running trains, whatever it is. You have to make sure that you are not attacked, which then will cause a major disruption to the nation, but you have to do that at your own cost. You are not getting any help from anybody from the government, and I think as we mature in this, that's going to be quite interesting. I did think it was quite fascinating, though, Lisa, that the ransomware attackers are providing you a risk report after they have compromised you. I suspect it will be much cheaper for you to get it from Qualys before you get compromised. So, however, I think without consultation with the marketing, I would say that if you do get a Qualys statue, we'll give the report for free. I did, in talking about cybersecurity, I did have a zero trust situation this morning. So apparently walking up the stairs to enter the thing, you need your badge to get in. And I did not have my badge, and the lady refused to let me in. And I was like, how do I get the badge? And she was like, well, they are in there. There's a little table. And I'm like, well, but how do I get in if you're not letting me in? She was like, no, I cannot let you in without a badge. But the badge was behind her at the table there. So it was quite interesting. And then I was trying to think about what's the threat scenario we're trying to protect against. It's a free conference. And the worst that could happen is you would go back educated on cybersecurity. But when you blindly enforce these rules, that's kind of what ends up happening. And so that really is the point of the fact that whatever we do in cybersecurity is all about the business. It is what is it that you're trying to protect? What is the risk that we're trying to take away? And what is happening is that we get so absorbed in the daily, I have to fix this vulnerability and I have to shoot that misconfiguration down, that we tend to forget that what is cybersecurity in terms of the business, that it is something that is really aligned with and has to be aligned with the business, because cybersecurity is a business risk. Whatever we do in cybersecurity is really trying to mitigate the business risk that comes from using digital infrastructure. And just like with any other risk, you need to be able to think about what is the potential of a loss, and then decide on how you are going to spend, how and how much are you going to spend in terms of mitigating that loss. You cannot spend $10 million to mitigate a loss of $10 million. That's just bad business. But to be able to decide how much do you spend on cybersecurity, you need to be able to kind of articulate what is the potential of loss that comes from cybersecurity. And that's cyber-related incidences, and that's one of the things that I'm really looking to talk about, because as the last couple of years have gone by and more attacks have come in and more spend is happening in cybersecurity, CISOs are going out in front of the boards. The questions are pivoting less towards which vulnerability did you fix and how many vulnerabilities did you fix, into more business-related questions. And that's really causing the big divide that we are seeing between security and the business. So the CISOs really have been wanting to go in front of the board a few years ago, so that it's an important topic. I want to be able to present to the board. I want to be able to talk about things. Then they go there, and the board has absolutely no idea what they're talking about, because they're saying we spent $2 million implementing two-factor authentication, and it's great. And the board is like, oh, that's awesome. So how much more secure are we? Can't explain. And that doesn't compute from a business perspective. You spend something, how do you explain what the value of that protection is? What did you protect? How much did you protect? And if you're not able to articulate that, then you kind of get into the situation where your CFO is saying, well, if I give you $10 million, will you be 100% secure? And then you say, well, obviously not. Well, if I give you $8 million, will we be 100% secure? No. Well, then here's $8 million. And that's how cyber budgets are, because if you cannot provide an outcome and output, then you are in a situation where you're just sort of randomly thinking of the amount of money you should spend in cybersecurity much more as just a percentage of your IT budget, rather than something that is rooted in what your risk is. And typically these numbers are 6%, 8%, something like that. And that's the amount of money then that is given to you to say, well, we can't spend infinite money, because even if I give you 100 million, you're saying you're not going to be able to tell me that we are going to be fully secure. So then what's the point of spending this much money? And so there is this push and pull that is happening between the security teams and the business, because that's the business wants to say, I can't continue to spend crazy amounts of money, even though I know how to mitigate the risk. But if you're telling me to spend as much as my IT spend is, that's not going to happen. And the big reason why we are continuing to see this deepening divide is, as it is with cybersecurity, there is a knee-jerk reaction to go buy out the next shiny tool that is going to kill that one thing, and magic and AI and in everything that all the new companies will tell you. And we just end up spending on another tool without being, again, able to articulate the value of what that gets, other than saying we're hopeful that it's going to be better. The other issue is the language that is being spoken between the two different groups is very different. People don't understand the language. The CFO who's approving the budget is very used to saying, here's the spend, here's the outcome. And the outcome does not mean that there's a profit. It could also just mean that, hey, we mitigated this much amount of risk. And when you talk about risk, if you look at a financial risk as an example, it's a very clear equation. They will say, look, there's 3 different elements of financial risk that we might have as a company. And this particular, if we fail this control, it's going to be a $100 million fine. And we're mitigating that by hiring a consultant and creating an ESG report, and that is about $100,000. And so now you kind of have this equation, and that's what they are used to. And if you're not able to give that, so and I'll give you a great example of Jonathan, who's our CISO, came to me, and we were talking about cyber insurance, and this was a great example of how communication between business and cybersecurity is broken. And when 3 years ago I took over as the CEO, my first board meeting, I went to the board meeting, and our CISO back then gave an update to the board, and I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. And the board was like, oh, wow, that's great. But then 2 years later, now that there is so much more awareness, that CISO is not with Qualys anymore. I just want to be clear. That's not Jonathan. Jonathan is still here. But Jonathan, he came and he said, hey, Sumedh, we have a quote for you to sign. We have cyber insurance, and they are charged. The insurance rate premium dropped for the same coverage this year. They dropped. We don't know why. We don't want to go and ask why, because they might increase it back again. So I said, whatever, $600,000 for $20 million insurance. And my question was, well, Is that enough? How do we know if 20 million is enough or not? Or is it too much? Are we getting too much? Are we spending too much? We just literally have no idea if we don't actually do the work of being able to articulate the risk that the particular business has. And the risk, as Lisa talked about, is different for every business. So being able to articulate that is very important. The third part is somehow there is this feeling that the security professionals in cybersecurity, it is not their job to influence or be part of the remediation activity. When the reality is that if you spend 10 million pounds putting together all the tooling and building all these nice dashboards, and it's looking all great and perfect, but the remediation that is being done is not done in time before an attacker attacks you, your entire spend on building all of this is a complete waste. Everything you did is a complete waste of money because you were not actually able to get an outcome that actually stopped a particular attack. So being able to make sure that it's not that you're only able to calculate the risk, communicate the risk, but also being part of remediating the risk is something that we're seeing more and more becoming very important. The problem is that how do you articulate risk? And today we have different teams. You have the Zero Trust team, and then the cloud team, which is better than the VM team now, and then you have the identity management team, and so there are different teams on cybersecurity. And so when you ask the question, well, how much risk do you have, it's like this. So everybody is telling you one number. Somebody's saying, oh, yeah, we have 3 vulnerabilities. Somebody's saying we have 5 misconfigurations. Somebody's saying that we have 25 identities that are, but everybody's seeing one part of it. Nobody's really able to give a bigger picture of how do those things relate with each other, and what is the actual potential risk of something bad happening, and what is the probability of that? How much is the risk, and what is the probability of something like that happening? Without that, it's just you're getting all kinds of different answers, and they don't. And that's typically what is happening more and more. That the CISOs who wanted to be in the board meetings 4 years ago, just yesterday we had a meeting, and they're like, yeah, I don't want to go anymore. Because now they're asking me questions like, and I go and say, oh yeah, we patched like 75,000 vulnerabilities, and they're like, okay, so the question again comes back to, okay, so how much safer are we now? Is that good? Is that bad? I can't explain that. And so till you have a full picture of what sort of your risk is going to be, it is definitely a challenge in continuing to focus on the right things in cybersecurity, and I'll get to that part. But let's talk about what are the different types of risk. And I think Lisa talked about a few of those, and there is definitely different types of risk. So I'll cover all of them in one go. But there is the risk of, well, if I lose a few PII records, there is a certain amount of fine that you have to pay per record, as an example. There is you could be sued because that information was used for some attack, but that's limited by your indemnification, your liabilities, etc. There is a loss of reputation. Now that is very interesting these days, because if you think about it, how many of you have switched a provider because they had a breach? Almost nobody does that today, because everybody's getting breached. Literally everybody's getting breached. And so you're like, who do you go to? Because one of my banks that I bank with, they just got recently, they said, oh, they got hacked into something, and everybody says that, oh no, but we're fine, and even if the records are leaked, it's like hard to know, whatever it is. And so when you look at it from the lens of the business is saying, well, I can do that math already. Okay, I know I have 100,000 PII records. Worst case, I have to pay £5 per record. This is what, so you can sort of build that into your financial equation. Reputational risk, you want to minimize that, but is that something that's going to cost you a significant amount compared to your business? Most business leaders will say no, not really. So the big part that is really concerning for the business, and which Lisa hit on really well, is at the end of the day is availability. A big part is that if you say that this ransomware attack is going to bring down our infrastructure for 5 days. If your digital infrastructure is down for 5 days, that probably is the biggest loss that your business can have, rather than investigating a potential breach and then finding how many records were were breached, and then being able to manage all of that. So the loss of availability is probably one of the biggest things that everybody has to look at. And in many ways, that's a little bit easier to calculate per day to say if your business is down on a daily basis, how much loss you're going to have. Now, interestingly, ransomware, and it's always bad to get any cyber attack, but in many ways, if you reflect on the presentation that Lisa did, you are almost in a better situation if it's a ransomware attack, because they are motivated to get paid, and they are very professional. They bring in their mental health expert immediately on the chat, and they tell you to stay calm, don't panic, we got it covered. We are partners with you. We're going to help you. Give us your cyber insurance policy. We will do the crunching of the numbers. We have already looked at all of your financial records from public filings, and so we think you can afford something like that, and your negotiation is within a certain range of that, because they don't want to make a demand that you're like, well, I just don't have the money to pay it, and I'm not going to do that. So they are very motivated to get paid, and so in many ways that is a risk that you can calculate that, and you can do it yourself. If they can do it for you, I'm sure you can do it yourself. So the ability to articulate that that exact risk in a couple of these different factors, it becomes very important. And the question really becomes, is if we're not doing this today, you're getting a generally random sum of money for your cyber budget, which is based on some percentage of your IT infrastructure or something, IT spend or something like that. And so you have to now manage, and you have to prioritize what are the things that you really want to focus on within the amount of money that you have. And the reason why cybersecurity and a lot of you, it feels helpless, because it feels like you're working all the time, you're working nights and weekends, and still the mountain of issues and vulnerabilities and whatever does not seem to go down. It just seems to, I don't know if anybody of you feels like, hey, by the end of this summer, we will have fixed all of our vulnerabilities, and then we could just go enjoy our summer. Nobody, okay. So that's my sanity check. I'm at a cyber conference. So then the question really becomes is that if you have a certain amount of resources available to you, where should you put those resources? What's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, as they say, right? The question is, you cannot say what's going to give the biggest bang for your buck if you don't know where your biggest risk is. And just to illustrate an example of why we feel so fatigued is I asked the team to go and look into, this thing has too much animation. So I asked our team to go look into, Qualys obviously does a lot of detections throughout the year. So in fact, in the last 12 months, we detected about 2.6 billion vulnerabilities across our entire customer base. And a lot of people are like, well, I'm going to use CVSS for prioritization. That's sort of the first thing to say, yeah, we'll use CVSS. So I asked the team to go and figure out how many of those 2.6 billion vulnerabilities we detected actually had a CVSS score of high and critical. And I was pretty shocked to find out that 80% of those detections were CVSS high and critical, which tells me that there are so many vulnerability findings that people are not even scanning the ones that are low or medium, because you're not even going to get to fix the highs and the criticals, so what's the point in even detecting some of these other things? Now, what was interesting is that then when we, a lot of those vulnerabilities, the 2.1 billion, whatever, actually are not exploitable. There is no path of compromise today, while the potential, if something happens, makes the score go high. You don't have an immediate risk because there is no exploit available for that or something like that. So there is no real risk coming from those things. And so when we applied our true risk algorithm to those 80% of the vulnerabilities, we figured out about only 20% of the vulnerabilities actually pose a risk because there is some form of exploit available, that somebody is exploiting them, that there is an actual path to get to those. So what does that, these are all numbers, but what does that practically mean today? That means that if you spend 5 days, 1 week, 5 days, fixing all of your vulnerabilities, 4 days out of those was work that you did that did not lead to any risk reduction for your business. It's only the 20% that you fix on that one day is what actually led to risk reduction for your business. So you're doing a lot of this work, and you're not getting any actual outcome from the risk reduction side of the house. On top of that, there is another 10% vulnerabilities that we found, which are classified low CVSS, but actually are used by attackers to get into your environment because they are part of a kill chain. They themselves may not be something that is important, and then you miss that. And then that is what leads to a compromise or an attack. And so if you, and we had some interesting stats where we looked at the top 10 critical vulnerabilities, exploitable vulnerabilities across our entire customer base. And we found out that those who were using the Qualys patch management were fixing those on an average of, I think, like 50 days or something like that, versus those who were using some other patching solution was about 150 days. And the reason that this was, the amount was lower, the number of days was lower, was not because our patch management solution is really good. It is, but it is because that it was coupled with the prioritization that goes with it, because now instead of spending 5 days and doing a bad job at everything, they were actually spending 1 day only on the most exploitable ones that were being highlighted and patching those, and able to do a much better job by not missing anything instead of just being overwhelmed with the amount of work. And that's why that prioritization is so critical when you have an infinite amount of resources, finite amount of resources, and then you need to figure out where you need to focus some of those resources. And so the outcome of this, obviously, is that you really need to be able to know what is your real risk, what's your true risk to the business. That's something that is important, that you have to articulate that. And the question is then, how do you calculate that risk? And that, computing that kind of a risk is not that straightforward, obviously, because of you saw the elephant in the silos, and there are multiple different risk factors that come into play, and a lot of them are related, right? An asset that's internal with a privilege escalation vulnerability by itself is not as bad. However, if the identity team sees a identity where two-factor authentication is disabled or a password is compromised, actually has access to that machine, that becomes a much more of an interesting risk. And so being able to calculate real sort of risk has to sort of be a bit of a bottoms-up exercise to first collect and prioritize all of your risk scores. The problem is that even before you get there, most organizations do not even know how many assets they have. Well, not most, every organization. I think the CMDBs are perpetually broken, and so any reliance on a CMDB, which is your step zero, is your security program is already broken when you start. And what was interesting is that, and you'll see that today, are we doing this, Himanshu, the demo? Where's Himanshu? What is it called, the SSID? No, I know the product name, guys. The SSID, what is it called? QSC demo? Q demo, okay. So one of the things that we recently launched was the ability for any of your existing Qualys agents to be turned into a passive listener on the network, so it can identify any unknown devices that you do not know about, somebody plugged in a security camera, a new machine or something like that. And we have about 400 customers that enable that capability, and on an average, we found 30% more devices that they did not know about. It's a pretty big number, 30% devices that they did not know about, without having to deal with IT and stuff like that. And so I think they have set up today as a demo, a hotspot called Q demo or something like that. And if you connect to it, within about 6 minutes, that asset will show up in Qualys without requiring to do anything. But the point here is that if you don't know your assets, that's really, you cannot calculate your risk, because what's the point? You're going to have 30% of the stuff that you even don't know what that's doing. The second is, without having the threat context we saw with the CVSS. Without having threat context, there is no point, because if the vulnerability is not actually exploitable or is not being exploited, there is no real risk that comes from that. But then the last part is the business context. So even if you have a highly exploitable vulnerability, if it is not on your critical infrastructure, if it is not on assets that actually are related to the availability of your most important digital systems, the exact same vulnerability has a very different risk profile if it is on your lab machine. if that vulnerability is detected in just a code scan somewhere in your CI/CD pipeline, that exact CVE, if that's detected in a production environment with a Qualys scan, they have totally different risk. One is out there exploitable on the production server, one is theoretical in your code base, right? So that's why a lot of people call these code scanning tools false positive as a service, because they'll dump all these CVs on you, and if you start to just spend all your time and money fixing those, you're going to miss out things that are super critical that are actually happening in the production environment. The second part is, even if you're able to calculate, the communication piece is super important. Today, you scan, find 30,000 things, and you dump 30,000 Jira tickets on your IT team, and the dev team hates you, the IT team hates you, because they have a job to do, and all they get from you is like, okay, here's more things to do, and even if you give them top 10, you use 20 different tools, and so you're going top 10 from 20 tools, and they're like, okay, now I'm back to fixing 1,000 things here. So being able to articulate what is important to fix for the business. If we're able to communicate that, hey, you don't need to worry about these 10,000 findings, if you just fix these 5 things, you'll reduce the risk to the business by half. That's going to make them feel more excited as a partner and a hero, that they are going to want to partner with you to do that. But that communication is very important. I don't care about, I care about vulnerabilities because you guys buy the solution, but as a CEO, when Jonathan, I don't care about a particular CV or something like that. The communication to the board, the executives who are looking at the holistic business has to be very different, because that is what is going to determine what funding you're going to get, what is the risk, and are we actually spending the money on the right things so that we can mitigate the risk. So that communication becomes very important, and for that, you need to be able to have quantification of the risk. And quantification of the risk is something that evokes many different emotions in different people. Some people are thinking of the FAIR methodology and the Monte Carlo and things that are so complex that you just don't want to deal with those. For some others, it's just big boulders. You want to talk about red, green, yellow. Some people just want to say high, medium, low. But the ability to articulate that risk is going to be very important as we move forward this year and in the next year. The next part is, like I said, if you don't actually fix those things in time, all of the investment that you have made in calculating and communicating is of no value. And so a lot of times the silos are between the IT team and the security team. And when I launched patch management with Qualys about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a huge amount of pushback from people saying, yeah, nobody will ever buy patching from a vulnerability scanning solution. And you will be surprised to hear that in the last 12 months, Qualys has deployed 55 million patches on our customer environments with our agent, just in the last 12 months. Makes us one of the largest patch management vendors probably out there in the market, because there is such a desperate need from the security teams to find some way to mitigate security-related vulnerabilities. And that's a big indication of how the remediation capability is becoming very important for a lot of the security teams as well, and being a partner that is becoming very important. So being able to automate as much as you can is helping speed up threat response. If you don't have to send your entire IT team on the weekend fixing Google Chrome exploitable vulnerability, which somehow they always tend to release it on a Friday, if that could be automated, which a bunch of our customers have done that, where they create automated reels saying, if it's a Chrome on a laptop, the chance of a patch breaking something is extremely minimal. But if I can get 60% of my patches, 40% of my patches done more in an automated way, then I don't have to really worry about, or my resources can actually spend more time on the server side things that need more of my attention. I'm not burning people out. And that is helping us speeding up threat response as well. And it really brings then the question of why is there hesitation for deploying patches, is because, it's going to have an operational impact on the system. And that's why there is a big pushback saying, oh no, if you patch, something will break. Now, if a cyber attack is going to cause operational unavailability, is just as bad. But it is valid that if you give your IT team a list of 10,000 things to patch, the just statistically, the possibility of an impact is much higher when you're deploying 500 patches versus if you have a very targeted focus on saying, look, here's the 5 most exploitable things that can be mitigated with 3 patches. That is a much lower operational risk than deploying 1,000 patches at any given point of time. So that's really something that is important. And it was really quite interesting for us to see when we ran the numbers for our customers here in UK versus the rest of the world. It's quite interesting to see that while on the internal vulnerabilities, which was the critical vulnerabilities, it was taking 23 days for the global customers in UK. It's taking only 15 days to fix the internal vulnerabilities. And similar, you can see on the external vulnerabilities that are facing on external assets. And now, maybe a coincidence, maybe not, but what we do know is that the UK customers have the highest number or highest penetration of the patch management module from Qualys. So I'm not saying that that is the only reason, but that indicates a openness and an attitude towards partnering with the IT teams to be able to have a bigger impact. And that actually does show quite well in the numbers. Now, you might think that's great. I think the NCSC does not quite think that, because they have a new mandate that basically says that external facing critical vulnerabilities need to be patched in 5 days. I hope all of you are aware of that. Somebody from NCSC will be visiting you after this. A simple statement: patch all your external facing critical vulnerabilities in 5 days, which has 3 components. What are my external facing assets? Most people don't have a clear idea on an updated basis. Second is, what are my critical vulnerabilities? Sort of have an idea. You have a list of all vulnerabilities, but are they really critical to the business? And the third part is actually being able to patch them in a given 5 days. So if you don't know the first 2, you're never going to get to the third part of actually patching those things. Now, the great thing, and Shailesh is going to talk about it in our UK customers as an example, we see there's a good number of customers that actually are finding, assessing, and patching vulnerabilities within 5 days of detection of that particular vulnerability. So it is possible to do it. So it's not a crazy requirement. I think somebody told me yesterday that, I think it was Dave, that the proposal initially was 24 hours, and there was a big fight and got it pushed to 5 days at least so that you could do that. And so we are very confident, based on what some of our customers are doing, that it is possible, and that's why we have badges for those who are using Qualys as a visionary to leverage the patch management. So definitely encourage, don't quite listen to us, but talk to those people who are wearing the badge, because they are your peers who are actually getting benefit from this particular thing. And so I'm also very excited to announce, and somebody will show that later, that today we are launching a 30-day free service from Qualys for all UK customers that will allow you. Thank you all the Qualys people for clapping. I appreciate that. So that's going to give you 3 things. Our free external attack surface management capability, so you will discover all your external assets. Vulnerability management, so you can find all your critical vulnerabilities, and 30 days of ability to patch any vulnerability that you have, just so you can quickly get your baseline up within the next 30 days to the point where you have remediated, actually not just looked at it, but remediated a bunch of things. So, we don't require the tattoo, right, for that service? Okay, we don't, okay. So the point here is that you cannot be a scanner, okay? You cannot be, oh, I'm the guy who scans, or I'm the gal who scans and dumps all of this stuff on everybody. Every single person that is in cybersecurity needs to be a risk management expert, a risk management professional. You have to think of it from the point of risk. So again, how many of you here have the word risk in your title? I just said the word, not risk in your title, just the word risk in your title. Okay, still like almost nobody, which is the ironic thing, that everything that you're doing every single day is about reducing the risk to the company, and nobody actually has the word risk in your title. And so it's really important for us as we move forward to make sure that every cybersecurity expert is actually becoming a cyber risk expert, which means that all of you should be able to think from a risk perspective, should be able to articulate things from a risk perspective and communicate those things from the risk perspective and be a partner in reducing that risk. This is the next generation cybersecurity professional that will be the one who is going to be actually a partner to the business rather than just somebody that IT hates because they dump so many things on them on a daily basis. So what are the three things then that I think that the next generation security expert should be able to do, as I talked about, is be able to be a partner in measuring your known and unknown risks, being able to be a partner in creating data that is actually, that you can communicate in a way that makes sense to the correct stakeholders. And there are generally 4 key stakeholders. One is your CEO board. Second is your CFO. Third is your IT team that actually is going to do the remediation. And the fourth is your compliance team that wants to know that you're doing what you're doing. And those are the 4 key stakeholders. And each one of them needs a different communication for the exact same data that you have collected. And so we need to make sure that we are doing that. And so that for us has been a key driving factor in the innovation that Qualys has been doing the last couple of years, as we have grown from just being a vulnerability scanner in the last few years to doing cybersecurity asset management, because asset management is such a key part, adding patch management. Today you will hear about cloud security. You're going to hear about many other things that we're doing. But what we feel today that is really going to be important for the next couple of years and the future is that no matter, you will have a new security issue that will come up, cloud security now. Cloud security is pretty boring because AI security is the next thing everybody wants to know. Your bosses are coming to you and asking about LLMs, and they cannot even spell LLMs. But that's the new thing that is out there, so everybody's going to ask. And at the end of the day, if there is no risk to the business, don't waste your time on that. Like, okay, there's all kinds of stuff that is happening, but if it's not a meaningful risk, you shouldn't spend time. And so no matter what new technology will come, the ability to be able to measure, communicate, and eliminate that risk is going to be the key. And this is why we're super excited. At the end of last year, we launched the new Qualys platform, which is what we call as the Enterprise TruRisk platform, which is allowing our customers to measure, communicate, and eliminate cyber risk. And the goal here for everything we do in cyber is to reduce the risk to the business, is to de-risk the business. And that is really the key message, and we're super excited about the capabilities that we have. We are so excited that our marketing team put together a new video. Okay,
In today's world, cyber risk is business risk. And like any other business risk, you need to be able to rationalize and quantify your cybersecurity decisions, spending, and budget. But to stick this landing, simply knowing your cyber risk isn't enough. You now need a seamless way to reduce that risk. Unless you're doing that, it's just cyber risk tourism. So say bon voyage to dashboard sightseeing, and hello to the Qualys Enterprise TruRisk platform, empowering next-gen cybersecurity professionals to measure cyber risk signals across the entire enterprise, leveraging trillions of data points, then communicate that risk in the language of the boardroom, breaking down cyber risk to business impact and real dollar amounts, and then take action to quickly eliminate cyber risk through AI-powered prioritization, automation, and orchestration. Welcome to the new world of cyber risk management, the Qualys Enterprise TruRisk platform. Measure, communicate, and eliminate cyber risk. De-risk your business.
All right, let's hope the platform actually works as nice as the video was. But I love the cyber risk tourism. I thought that was great, because if we're not fixing stuff, we're just out there to sightsee and give people stuff to do and just watch them fail at what they're not able to do. So super excited about that. So quickly, and Shailesh will go a lot more in the details, but what are we doing, right? You're going to say, well, how do you build something like that? And there are 3 key steps. One is ability to collect data from all kinds of different sources, ability to then normalize that information to be able to communicate, create reports, and then find ways with whether it's patch management or a new capability we are launching that allows you to take mitigation actions on assets without patching. So if patch management is too scary, we can go in and change a registry key, we can update the permissions of a file. So small changes that will actually prevent an exploit. So that's really the key of how we're going to do that. Of course, you're going to say, well, another cybersecurity provider saying they are the single pane of glass. You've heard that too many times. We obviously know that if you really want to get a true picture of your entire risk, it cannot just be based on Qualys data. You have to be able to ingest data from other sources. And so that's why one key part of what we are going to be doing is not only taking, of course, all of the Qualys information, because that is very powerful, because you have the vulnerabilities. Even if you have patch or vulnerabilities, if you have a misconfiguration that can allow an attacker to be on the system is bad. You can have end-of-life systems that are causing risk to your environment. You could have identities. And so the ability to take all the Qualys information, collect information from other sources, and then providing a single way so that you can add weightages, you can do some of the risk scoring. You can say that, look, if there is a CVE being detected by Sneak, it gets a lower priority versus the same CVE detected by a Rapid7 Qualys Tenable scan gets a higher priority. If you have some misconfigurations coming from Wiz as an example, we can take that and then bring it into the bigger umbrella of what we call as a business entity, which is your critical services, right? That is, the availability of those critical services is important. And so how can we collect data from multiple different sources? That's going to be one key part of that. The second part of this is going to be able to communicate. So I gave the 4 key stakeholders. So we will be generating reports that can be provided to the right stakeholders. And a big part of that is the ability to be able to provide business value quantification in terms of monetary terms. So now you're not saying, here's business unit A that has a risk of 950, another business unit B has a risk of, let's say, 800. But if the first business unit is actually a $2 million per year business and the second one is a $300 million per year, that completely changes the way everybody's going to look at the risk and how they are going to act on that and communicate. So ability to have not just say, here's your risk score, but actually provide monetary values, provide sort of the risk of breach, what happens, what is the availability loss value if the platform becomes unavailable. So that reporting is going to be something that's going to be very valuable for a lot of different stakeholders like the CFO, CEO, et cetera. We're going to have compliance reporting. Of course, we already do a good reporting for the IT teams. And then we're going to continue to provide capabilities that allow you to go beyond patch management. So of course, you have patching, but the ability to say, hey, let me stop a process, let me run a quick script, let me isolate the device, let me change your registry key with the Qualys agent that you already have. But in addition, we will integrate with other mitigation providers that you might have that can allow you to take a mitigation action after you have reviewed the 15, 20 things that you really need to be focusing on to bring that risk down, and then model the risk scenario. Once you have brought all of your key risk factors in one place, being able to model to say, well, if I fix these 10 things, my score is going to go from 900 to 600. And the opposite of that, to say, well, my risk tolerance level for this business unit, which is 500 million, is 500 score. Then how do we bring that score? What do I need to do to bring it below 500? And our the new system, which is leveraging a lot of the AI learnings from our rest of the customers, will tell you, fix these 7 things, and that's going to bring that risk score down. And that's going to be a critical factor of what we do here to make sure that we're going beyond just being there to provide reports that you don't know necessarily what to do, but how do you empower you to be a partner with the business so that you can actually eliminate that risk as well. So, a last quick part, and I won't go too much on that. We talk a lot about platform approach, ability to have a single pane of glass, etc. So we had IDC do an independent study by talking to a bunch of our customers. We were not involved in that. They talked to our customers across the globe and came back with a way to basically articulate the value of what you're getting back from Qualys. And of course, based on the size of the enterprise, this number is going to vary. But that report is available because many times when you're trying to convince your procurement team and saying that, hey, I do want to consolidate on a single platform, it will give monetary benefit. It is much harder to do that by just waving hands in the air. And so having a report like that, I think, again, goes back to articulating why this approach of being able to provide a single platform where you can bring different tools together, articulate, measure the risk, articulate that risk, and being able to eliminate that risk is actually going to give you monetary ROI by reducing the cost that you spend on cybersecurity as well. So in summary, you have to be able to keep pace in your cyber mitigation efforts with the pace at which the business is going. So you cannot be a man or no woman where you're always saying no to anything that they want to do, which is what we get labeled as, or security always says no. How do you become a partner with them? And so a big part of that is going to be ensuring that you're able to aggregate, you're able to communicate, you're able to obviously leverage as much automation so that you can be as fast as the attackers. And there is no doubt that the attackers, as Lisa said, they are a business. And so, by the way, what are they doing? They are leveraging AI, because today what they do, they spray and pray and hope that one of the servers on the internet, they actually get hit, and then they can actually dig into that. Now, they have access to leverage AI LLMs, by the way, that now they can figure out, hey, I should focus my efforts on this particular enterprise. I have the highest chance of a compromise. So that way they get their bottom line for the business also improves. So bottom line is important for their business as well. It cannot be, because everybody wants to make a profit. And so being able to make sure that we are leveraging automation, we are leveraging AI capabilities as defenders to stay ahead of that is super important. And the last piece is, and this was really interesting when I had a conversation with a bunch of CISOs and asked them what they thought their job was, and a lot of them talked about it was to prevent breaches, to stop enterprise from being attacked, et cetera, et cetera. I asked a bunch of CEOs what they thought the job of their CISO was, and the biggest thing that came out is that they just wanted their CISO to articulate how much risk they have to the business. There was no expectation that somehow the CISO team magically is going to be able to stop all attacks and that there'll never be an attack. I mean, it's a nice wishful thinking, but that was not the expectation. So the biggest question that came up immediately after, if you said that, hey, I think one of our entities is breached, the next question was, how quickly can we recover? So being resilient, so never assume, obviously, that you're never going to be attacked. You should actually prep and be ready that you have been attacked, or when you are attacked, what is your decision process so that you know exactly how you are going to recover, how fast you're going to recover, who is going to make decisions on ransomware, payment, et cetera, how much money do you have? If something like that happens, to what extent could you do that? So the preparedness of being able to recover from an attack is probably the most important that you can do, in addition to obviously doing everything to prevent the possibility of an attack happening in your environment. So those are the key things that I wanted to talk about. And so with that, I will leave you to have a conversation with Shailesh. Or do I get to have questions answered or no?
Well, you're the boss.
Okay, all right. So since I did have to social engineer that person outside, I finally had to tell her that I'm paying for the whole thing. And then she let me in. So there's always a workaround for everything.
So yeah, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to raise their hands and we'll get a mic run over to you. It's quite hard to see from that camera.
This question here. Who's our mic runner? Let's see it in this.
Good morning, sir. In light of increasing zero-day vulnerabilities and challenges with meeting with the 4 hours RTOs that most people face, what do you want, or if you have invested maybe in VM tools like Qualys and all that,
Yeah.
and there is still no patch,
Yeah.
and there is no timely remediation as well, and especially when you are facing with compliance and regulatory authorities or you had a breach, what will you advise? How do one go about that? Because
Yeah.
these days, the zero-day vulnerabilities are seriously increasing,
Yeah.
and there are no patches, and there's no timely remediation. So how can that be managed?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I think all of you are old enough to have lived through Log4j, which happened, and that was probably the most colossal waste of IT and security time that we've seen in our lifetime, because so many people rushed like crazy to fix each and every possible instance of Log4j, because they thought it was being exploited, when a very small number of the Log4j deployments within any organization were actually exploitable. And we had to wake up our dev teams and IT teams on weekends, and they spend a lot of time fixing those things. And so to avoid something like that happening in the future, 0 days are always going to come, but making sure that you have a very good idea of what your critical infrastructure is, that making sure that those things are all tagged, making sure that you have a plan in the case that if there is some form of 0 day, what are the different steps that you're going to take. Of course, the new capability that we talked about, being able to quickly make changes to the asset with the Qualys agent. So within the first hour, if we know that that particular 0 day can be mitigated, there is no patch, so can we mitigate that 0 day by closing a port, by removing a cipher? We saw in Log4j, you could remove the JNDI class within that, and that would quickly mitigate the thing. So a quick small command can many times protect you from that. And so, but it is the same with the new SEC requirements that we have in the US, where you have to report a breach in 4 hours, in 4 days. Now, getting notification of a breach within 4 days is not a problem. Lots of tools do that. CrowdStrike is good at that. Few other tools are good at that. The big problem happens when you get a alert, people don't know who owns this asset. And you spend a week trying to find out who's the owner of the asset. And so for that, you really have to have made sure that you have done that mapping of continuously your assets being mapped and know which are your crown jewels, which are the ones that are important to your business, so that you can narrow the scope of a 0 day down to the 10 things that you really need to focus and fix. And then, of course, if you have the Qualys agent, that can very rapidly provide you a way to mitigate that particular risk. Or there may be other ways using other tools that you can leverage to mitigate the risk. Okay.
Thank you. Any others? Sorry, one here first.
Hi. The question I often get asked is, how do we compare to the rest of the industry? Because we've moved our C-suite onto the true risk score rather than counting number of vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And then they look at the number and they go, does that mean we're better, worse, the same compared to our peers in the area?
Yeah.
Is that something that Qualys would look to help? You've got the data, right? So
Yeah.
is that something that you'll look to try and help us publish, or how would you handle that question if you were asked, how do we compare?
Yeah, I get asked this question all the time, and pretty much since the beginning of Qualys, because we were the first SaaS provider that could actually get visibility across a large set of customers because it was an on-prem. And the challenge always was that, yeah, we could publish the number, but every organization is so different that the count of vulnerabilities really does not make any sense. Even if you're a bank, right, and a Citibank comparing with, a Bank of England are totally different infrastructure, and they don't necessarily have the same things to compare. And so now with TrueRisk score, we are in a better place because the score is a little bit, takes out of equation whether it's Linux or whether it's Windows, and it kind of normalizes it down to the score. But there is a bigger challenge, which is, again, it's not my challenge. There will be something that when I actually ask people, well, what would happen when you go to your board or your management and say, our score is better than everybody else by a significant amount? Budget cuts. That's the question I get asked all the time. I get told all the time, like, hey, I'm not sure I want to take it, because then they will be like, well, do we really need to spend that much money to be so much better than our peers? If all our peers are at 600, maybe we need to. So there is a fear. I don't know that it's a rational fear, but there is a fear of that. The other opposite problem is if you go and your score is much lower than your peers, then people are worried about their job. They're going to question all the money that we have been spending on that. But again, that's what I hear on the ground. Having said that, with TrueRisk score and with the Enterprise TrueRisk platform, as you will see in the demo that Shailesh is going to do, we are working on providing a baseline based on industry, so at least you can get that visibility, and then you can decide if you want to show that to your management or not. But that is something that we are going to, and Shailesh will demo that today, in fact. So I just want to make sure it doesn't lead to a budget cut or a job loss because we're too excited to show some data. Thank you.